So hello and welcome to another um, teaching of this series, A Long Walk, Walking with the Children of Israel. This is part 5, and this is entitled Regulation. So this is when we're going to start to see some regulations here. And I am Zakiya Monique, Master Relationship Strategist, Transformational Speaker, Bestselling Author of Killer Connections. I'm also the um, host and facilitator of the Safe Space, which you can join. It's a complimentary group in which you can kickstart your healing process. You can go to www.zmsafespace.com. I'm also over the Resetters Crew, which is a crew in which we're walking together to change various aspects of our lives, um, everything from our spirituality to physical, emotional, mental. And so it's not too late to join. If you would like to join, you can come on into the Resetters Crew with us. We'll give you more information for that. So today we're talking about walking with the children of Israel. Now we're going to see some regulations. And the thing that I want to bring to your attention, first and foremost, our scriptures are going to be Exodus chapters 19 through 23. Chapters 19 through 23. And what I want you to understand is God did not start off with regulations with them, right? God is a gracious God. He did not start off with regulations with them per se. What he told them was, obey me, obey, 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 right? He didn't go into these specific regulations until they were out of captivity, so out of bondage, you know, until he had proven himself, right? He had proven himself many times. And then he said, okay, here are my regulations. And so I believe that that is a very fair and just God, because he didn't come out the gate and say, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to do that. He didn't do that initially. Initially, he said, listen, I'm going to prove myself to you. I'm going to get you out of bondage. And then I will hold you accountable after I define certain things that I require you to do. So we, as should take heart. We should take, notice of that in our leadership, whether it's through parenting, whether it's in professional settings, of how we lead. That's the perfect example, in my view, of leadership in God is, let me get you out of bondage first, right? So first and foremost, God, they reached out, they cried out to God, and God came. Okay. And when he showed up, he didn't even, go to them first. He went to get someone who was going to work on his behalf with him first. So he set things up first. We should go into an atmosphere and we should observe. Many times we get a little bit of leadership. We go in the door. We want to, you fired, you fired, you fired, you fired. Change this, change that, change this. But a really, really, really wise leader would go in the door, see how things are working, see what's going on first, and then make informed decisions, as opposed to just making very abrupt and haphazard decisions. So I really love the leadership that God displayed thus far with the children of Israel. And I think that is something that we should definitely carry forward in our understanding of his leadership as well. So we're in Exodus 19 through 23. And most of these, I'm going to tell you, are just a lot of regulations. So we're just going to read some of the regulations. And first, I want to define regulations before I go into it and help you to understand what we're going to be looking at today. So first of all, what does regulations mean? Well, a regulation is a rule or a directive made and maintained by an authority. Okay, easy enough. We kind of knew that. It's a rule or it's something that somebody's telling us what to do, right? So, okay. And then not only do they tell us what to do or they give us the rule, but then they maintain it by making sure that we follow it. All right, that's easy enough. The next definition is of a familiar or predictable type, formulaic or standardized. It's like, okay, that's a little okay. It's a little different than what we would have probably thought, but okay, we can get with that too. Standards, okay. But then the next definition, we pretty much knew that the action or progress process of regulating or being regulated. Okay, easy enough. So here are some synonyms: rule, ruling, order, directive, adjustment, control, management, balancing, setting, or modulation. Okay, so basically, regulations are just rules. They're rules, they're standards, and it's a process. Okay, rules, standards, and processes. That's what we can take away from this. Rules, standards, and processes that require us to do things a specific way, right? It requires us to do things a specific way. And not only does it tell us to do it this way, but then we have a level of authority that ensures that we does it that way, that we do it that way. Okay, so that's pretty much what regulation is defined. So we're talking about God's regulations for the children of Israel at this point, right? And looking at Exodus 19. So we're starting at Exodus 19. It says, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians." I'm sorry, I started at 4. Exactly 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Exactly 2 months after the Israelites left Egypt, they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. So everything is going down at this point at Mount Sinai. After breaking camp of Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and set up camp there at the base of Mount Sinai. So they were at the base of the mountain, not in the mountain, not up. They were in the base. They were down at the base. Then Moses climbed the mountain to appear before God. The Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "Give these instructions to the family of Jacob. Announce it to the descendants of Israel." So first and foremost, understand that Moses had to go up so that he can communicate with God, so he can understand what God was saying. So that he had to separate himself from the crowd. He had to go away from those that he was leading. Right? So that, again, leadership, that's another aspect of leadership that we should be taking away from this, is that sometimes we have to go up, we have to go away from, in order for us to be able to have that time with God and have that crystal clear understanding. Sometimes we don't understand what God is saying because we have not gone up in our thinking. We have not gone up in our maturity. We have not gone up, and we have not gone away from. Okay, so verse 4, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You now know I carry you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." So he's saying, look, I carried you. Your enemies were my enemies. I demolished them in your face. I let you see. I let you see what I did to your enemies multiple times. Like if the 10 plagues weren't enough, or the plagues and killing the firstborn, all that wasn't enough, I let you see them drown in the Red Sea after I brought you through the Red Sea without a drop of water on you. So I made sure you saw whose side I was on consistently. Consistently. So verse 5 says, "Now if you will obey me and keep my commandment, you will be my special treasure from among all the people on earth. For all the earth belongs to me, and you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation." This is the message you must give to the people of Israel. So he's saying, if you obey me, I will put you up high. If you obey me, I will put you the highest among everybody on earth. If you obey me, I will put you over earth. If you obey me, I will make you special in my sight. All you got to do is obey me and keep my covenant. That's it. That's it. Verse 7. Now, this is what Moses has to go back and tell the children of Israel. Okay, so verse 7. "So Moses returned from the mountain and called together the elders of the people and told them everything the Lord had commanded. And listen to what the people said. And all the people responded together, 'We will do everything the Lord has commanded.' So Moses brought the people's answer back to the Lord." Now imagine being the Lord and he know they lying because he know everything. That got to be heartbreaking. That got to be heartbreaking. Because the only reason why you saying yes is because I'm giving you what you want. It's heartbreaking because I know you lying. I know you lying. I know it's only in great situations that you saying yes. No. Verse 9. "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will come to you in a thick cloud, Moses, so the people themselves can hear me when I speak with you. Then they will always trust you." Moses told the Lord what the people had said. Then the Lord told Moses, "Go down and prepare the people for my arrival. Consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they are ready on the third day, for on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Mark off a boundary all around." Well, before I go into that, let me say this. Notice how he said, look, I'm coming in 3 days, have them ready. Okay, now, what the Lord brought out to me about that, because I said, well, Lord, you said come as you are. But here you're telling them to consecrate themselves and be prepared for, when you come. So what's the difference between come as you are and us presenting ourselves before you as we are versus consecrate, clean up, and all of that? And you know what he said to me? He said, in the beginning, I allow you to come as you are. So when they were in bondage, he didn't tell them to clean up and consecrate and wash their clothes. Nope, he didn't do that. But it was after they were delivered from bondage and after he had proven himself and after they were in a different place with God, he expected them to then present themselves before him in a different way. Now, let's talk about Joseph. Joseph had been sold into slavery, sold to Potiphar, worked for Potiphar, lied on by Potiphar's wife because he would not do the wrong thing, taken to jail, left in jail for 2 years. But when they came to Joseph and said, the king wants you, it would seem like Joseph would have been excited to get before the king because, first of all, he's excited to, number one, get out of jail. But number two, he's excited to go before the king. Why? Because this is my way out. If I get before the king, then I know that I'm out of here for good. But what did Joseph do? Cleaned himself up before he went into the presence of the king. Why? He knew better. He knew better. This was not Joseph's first rodeo with the Lord. Again, the Lord had brought him out of the slavery from his cousins. He had brought him through slavery with Potiphar. He had brought him through 2 years of jail. And so after walking with God, there is no way that we should be presenting anything to God and anything or presenting ourselves as any kind of way before God. After walking with him, there's no way. God tells us to come as we are, absolutely, but he never intends for us to stay as we are. So we have to stop using that as an excuse because a lot of times we'll say, God said, come as you are. He did. Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, he tells us to come in a childlike manner, meaning come humble, come free, come. But he does not intend for us to always come as we are, meaning we can come any old way. No. Because eventually, after walking with him, he changes our lives. The Bible tells us that God circumcises the heart. Only he sees the inward. So he cuts off the things that need to be cut off and prunes us and all of these things. And so after going through pruning and after going through a circumcision of heart and after going through walking and God proving himself with us, there's no way that we should want to present ourselves to him in the way that we once did. Okay? Now, he's telling them, he told Moses, we're at verse 10. Then the Lord told Moses, go down and prepare the people for my arrival, consecrate them today and tomorrow, and have them wash their clothing. Be sure they're ready on the third day, for on that day, the page flipped, sorry. On that day, on that day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai as all the people watch. Then he told him something specific. 12, mark off a boundary all around the mountain. Warn the people, be careful, do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the boundaries will certainly be put to death. No hand may touch the person or animal that crosses the boundary. Instead, stone them or shoot them with arrows. They must be put to death. However, when the ram's horn sounds a long blast, then the people may go up on the mountain. He gave specific instructions on how to deal with things. God takes his glory for granted. I mean, seriously, we can't take his glory for granted. Okay? Even sinners knew to cover their eyes when God had shown himself in those times. They knew to cover their eyes because they didn't want to behold the glory. They knew it could kill you. It was so, I mean, I think it was, I can't quote the scripture, but it said that I think it knocked John out. The glory of God knocked John to his feet. Knocked John off his feet, rather. So we are not to take the glory of God for granted. Like, How are we taking the glory and the presence of God for granted when this is the same glory that killed people? If they, meaning, and what I mean by that, when I say kill people, I'm not talking about he killed them on purpose, but just it was too much to take in. They knew, cover your eyes. It's too much to take in. I can't look at it. It's too much to take in. I can't look directly at it. It's too much to take in. And yet here we are frivolous with it. Here we are taking it for granted, taking God's presence for granted. No, 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 no. Verse 14, so Moses went down to the people. He consecrated them for worship, and they washed their clothes. He told them, get ready for the third day, and until then, abstain from having sexual intercourse. Okay? And even now, many people don't pay attention to this, but fasting requires us to do the same thing. You're not supposed to go into a fast without speaking with your husband or wife and abstaining. And even the Bible tells us not to abstain for long times from sex, because you don't want the enemy to come in between. You don't want the enemy to come in between that, because the enemy will tempt. So, we have to be mindful of these types of things, because that's abstaining from that, abstaining from sexual activity is like another aspect of fasting. When you turn down your plate, you're putting the flesh up under subjection. Well, guess what? When you have these cravings for sex, you're putting the flesh under subjection as well. Okay, so that's like another level of fasting. On the morning of the third day, thunder roared and lightning flashed, and a dense cloud came on the mountain. There was a loud, loud blast from the ram's horn, and all the people trembled. Moses led them out from the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Can you just imagine what that was like? Like, wow. You know what I mean? All of Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it. He had descended on it in the form of fire. And that was the thing about God, was consistent, because how did he show himself in the bush to Moses? Fire. The smoke billowed into the sky like smoke from a brick kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently, and the blast of the ram's horn grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God thundered his reply. The Lord came down on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses climbed the mountain, again going up and away from. Then the Lord told Moses to go back down and warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die. Even the priests who regularly come near to the Lord must purify themselves so that the Lord does not break out and destroy them. But Lord, Moses protested, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai. You already warned us. You told me, mark off a boundary all around the mountain to set it apart as holy. But the Lord said, go down and bring Aaron back up with you. In the meantime, do not let the priests or the people break through to approach the Lord, or he will break out and destroy them. He's saying, look, go tell them again. So Moses went down to the people and told them what the Lord had said. He like, listen, tell them again. Because look who we dealing with. God knows exactly who we are. If God repeats something, it's important. Don't do this. Be mindful. God sent me a message like 6 times. And he's like, because I'm serious. Be mindful. Be mindful. Don't do this. Don't do that. Be mindful. He wants to make with clarity. Sometimes God sends us his clarity through repetition. Send it to you 5 different times. I told you 5 times. Don't do this. Don't do that. Be mindful. Okay. Moving on to Exodus 20. Exodus 20. Here's where our 10 commandments are. So now he's starting to give them commandments. Then God gave the people all these instructions. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. Number 1, you must not have any other gods but me. First things first. Now here, as we go through these commandments and regulations, I want us to stop and think about how we would be able to handle those today. As we're going through these commandments and regulations, Think about if we did not have a sacrifice and had to be held accountable for these things today or make sacrifices. You often hear me say that if we had to live in the times of old, there wouldn't be an animal left to sacrifice. We'd have to start sacrificing humans because we would not be able to cross every T and dot every I here. So keep in mind, think about today. Think about today. And remember that Jesus came not to do away with the law. He came to fulfill it for us because we never could. So if he didn't come to do away with the law, that means God still expects us to try to do these things. He expects us to honor these things. He just knows that we need a sacrifice because we're not going to be able to honor it all. And so Jesus became our sacrifice. He, with with his bloodshed. His bloodshed, we have a forever sacrifice. Thank God. So we can go and we can say, Lord, forgive us. We can go to the Lord ourselves, all of those things. But just imagine if we didn't have Jesus, if we didn't have a sacrifice and we had to obey everything that we're getting ready to go into. Just keep that in mind. And that makes us understand why we say, thank you, Jesus. See, because some of us are saying, thank you, Jesus, because our grandma taught us to, or because that's what everybody else said at church. But when we start to realize that, hey, I wouldn't be able to make it without the bloodshed and the remission of sins for Jesus. Thank you. It becomes so much more personal because there's no way. Like just the first commandment presents challenge with our whole generation. Like this whole generation that's living. You must not have any other God but me. Well, that right there would have cost us every animal on the earth. Because whether the idolatry, because this is all it is idolatry, whether the idolatry comes from us putting ourselves above the will of God, our man, our material things, our children, other gods, right? Other gods. Some folks just flat out worship other gods. Putting more into the things of God. Okay, some people worship titles more than anything. Is there so much that we put in God's place? We would be in trouble. We would have to sacrifice like all the time just for idolatry. Verse 4 says, you must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or earth or in the sea. So he's saying you ain't got no business making no graven images and no. Verse 5 says, you must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other God. I lay the sins of your parent upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generation of those who reject me. Uh-oh. Again, thank you, Jesus, that even if my grandmother believed in something different, and even if my grandfather believed in something different, even if my mother believed in something different, thank you, Jesus, that I have a sacrifice that I can declare the Lord, God. Okay, I can declare that God is the God over my life, even if God wasn't the God over theirs. Even if they look to the left or to the right, I can declare and decree in the name of Jesus that my stance is with God and I can have those curses broken off me. Thank you, Jesus. But I will lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commandments. Number 7, you must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Well, we're going to need the rest of the animals. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. There go the rest of the animals. So if we ain't kill them all as sacrifices for idolatry, there go the rest of the animals. Verse 8, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Well, you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, your males, your female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living with you or living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. Isn't it amazing how a lot of people don't, and I'm going to say this, and this might be a little controversial, but just hear me out. I believe that COVID saved as many lives as it took. I believe that COVID saved as many lives as it took. However, I believe that many people did not see it that way because of how direct the deaths were, but how indirect the living was or the saving was. Here's what I mean. We have no idea how many people were on the brink of heart attacks, suicide, all these types of things because of being just stressed out. But what happened? God shut the world down for 2 months, 3 months. And guess what? People had no choice other than to lay it down, get rest. We had never faced a time like that ever, where the world was like, stop. Probably, some people didn't get a chance. Now, doctors and things like that were overwhelmed. However, there are, here in Detroit, the big 3 plants were shut down, which meant that a lot of the big 3 funds a lot of everything else here, right? So you got the big 3 plants here, but then a lot of the smaller plants are the ones that give the big 3 the parts that they need. So all of the parts plants were shut down. The big 3 was shut down. So many of the businesses were operating. If they were operating, they were on skeleton crews. It saved a lot of lives because a lot of people's health improved just by resting. We don't think we need to rest. We need to get up and be doing, going all the time because we serve this hustle culture. This hustle culture that says, get out there and get it. Sleep when you're dead. Oh, okay. Okay, we've made it unpopular to rest, not understanding that if God rested, who do we think we are? It's a commandment for us to rest. We should not feel guilty about it. If we live a life that does not allow us to have a day of rest, then we have to stop and ask ourselves, what's on our plate that was not put there by God? Because God is surely not going to tell us to rest for a day and then pile our plate to the point where we can't. So again, that time that we took to just rest, to just lay, I can be honest and tell you that time, my son asked me, Mom, do you think they'll ever shut the world down again? He said, I don't like the COVID part. I don't want people to die. He said, but I sure enjoyed that time. And I think a lot of other people did too. They just don't want to admit it because they don't want to be thinking that, they don't want to be said that they enjoyed people dying. None of us, I think none of us enjoyed the reason. But to be shut down and to just have time to rest and to have time to realize your family and not to have to worry about going to get your hair done, your feet done, your this done, that done. I mean, it just was refreshing. And it saved a lot of lives. It saved a lot of lives because a lot of people were on the brink just from the stress of everyday culture, hustle culture, rest when you die culture. They were on the brink of dying. And it saved a lot of lives. It saved a lot of lives. It even blessed a lot of people financially. Some people got lump sum of money and ain't been the same since, meaning in a good way. We just highlight the bad. But it saved a lot of people because it took a lot of financial strain off some people as well. So I'm fully aware. I'm fully aware that COVID was not a good thing. It's not something that we would want to come back. But the time that we had to rest and some of the financial perks are the reason that some of the student loans were forgiven. So there were some things that happened during that time that allow a lot of stress to be lifted and a lot of burdens to be lifted and a lot of stress to come off of people's bodies. And as a result, it saved their lives. God tells us to rest for a reason. We need it. Okay. Verse 12, honor your mother and father, then you will live a long, full life in the land that the Lord is giving you. Listen, my grandmother used to always say a disobedient child won't live to see half their days. And many of the children that we see now getting shot down and getting hurt, some of the young women, okay, some of the young women that are running away into the arms of older men that won't listen to their parents, right? I'm not saying every young girl, and I'm not saying every young boy that's shot. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is sometimes they don't listen. And when they don't listen, and they're out there under, from the ark of safety. Because God says, honor your mother and your father. And he tells us that again over in Ephesians. Honor your mother and your father. Again, when God repeats something, it's important. He's giving you clarity. This is what I mean. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Verse 13, you must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely against your neighbor. Listen, just because this stuff is in the Old Testament does not mean that God has decided that, oh, that don't matter no more. That's not true. He still expects us. He still expects us to do these things. He still expects us to serve him in this way. You must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Don't covet your neighbor's good. When the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horn, and when they saw the flashes of lightning and the smoke billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance trembling with fear. And then they said to Moses, you speak to us and we'll listen, but don't let God speak directly to us or we shall die. Moses said, don't be afraid. Moses answered them, for God has come in this way to test you, and so that you will fear, so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning. He came like this because he wants you to know he's serious. As the people stood in the distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. Listen, God showed up that way to get their attention. Why? Because they had not listened to him when he came, and just was regular. He came regularly to them. He sent Moses to them. They ain't listen to Moses. They ain't want to hear that. Oh no, we're gonna do what we want to do. What you do? What you brought us here all this way to kill us? So God had attempted to reach them several times before he showed up in thunder and lightning and crashing and all of that type of stuff and all this noise. He came that way because when he came the regular way, you didn't listen. So now I got to come this way so that you know I'm serious. I'm not here to play. So now he's getting ready to tell them about the proper use of altars. How do you use altars? Verse 22, and the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. You saw for yourself that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. Don't do that. Again, here he is repeating himself because he already told them no graven images. Build for me an altar made of earth and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Build my altar wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look under your clothing and see your nakedness. And God wanted nothing but purity associated with his altar. So he told them, if you're going to worship me, you're going to use the altar, this is how you should build it. This is how you do it. And that's what I love about God, is that he does not tell us what to do without giving us some instruction. We just have to listen and follow the instructions to a T. All right. So Exodus 21, this is now regulations for the people. Okay, this is fair treatment of your slaves. And the verse that you can cross this with is Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 18. So Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 18 kind of talks a little bit about this too. So these are the regulations you must present to Israel. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for you serve for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. I think that was not what happened when slavery was in effect. Right. And this is very controversial for many people because they're like, well, God wanted us to be slaves. He allowed us to be slaves. So, this Bible and all this, people say a lot about this, here. Not understanding that in that time, servants essentially were like desired to be servants. Like the children of Israel, didn't you hear the children of Israel said they would rather go back? After God had rescued them, they were like, we would rather go back, right? So let's be clear. There are some people who would rather be servants than to go out and serve on their own. And I had never thought about this as being realistic. And I'm not justifying slavery in any way at all. But there are people who would rather be slaves to a system even now. There are people who would rather have somebody tell them, because tell me, how is slavery different from being on assistance? Yeah, you may not have to get up and pick cotton or anything like that, but you have somebody over you telling you how you can move, what you can do, where you can go, what they're going to give you, right? So they determining your whole livelihood. We just don't think, because they're not beating us physically, but aren't they beating us emotionally and mentally? Because when your money is not right, and you're not able to take care of your children, now you're disheartened, right? When they could tell you at any given time, I'm cutting your food stamps off, I'm cutting your welfare off. You didn't come up here on the day I told you to come up here. What is that? What is that but slavery? You didn't do what I told you to do, so I'm taking it all away. But we think, oh, slavery is only if you're in a cotton field, or if somebody got you on a plantation, or they beating you. No, slavery modern day just looks different, but it's surely still here. And it will always be here. You know why? Because the Bible says the poor are among us always. Now, yes, it's not just talking about financially poor, but we're talking about people who are poor mentally. There are some people, believe it or not, who would rather remain a slave. Even if it was slaves of the previous times, they would rather be a slave than to have to deal with the responsibility of being free. Because freedom is not free. Freedom comes with responsibility. And so there are some people who would love to remain in prison. Why? Because they don't have to worry about coming out here and providing for themselves. I heard someone say that to me before. A guy said that to me before. He said he would rather stay in prison because at least he knew that he would have a place to stay and he would have food to eat. But if he came out here, it just seemed so overwhelming to have to fend for himself. So we may not believe that people think like that because we don't, but there are some people who do. There are some people who do. Okay. So it's saying, if he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be free with him. Like, you can't keep his wife and then let him go. Like, no. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave, and see, let's talk about how people sometimes became slaves in this time too, because that's what God just put on my mind. Remember back in the times in Egypt when Joseph had interpreted those dreams, the fat calf and the skinny calf, and he told the people to store up, right? And the people had 7 great years, and they ate and feasted and all of that. And then when those next 7 years came, they were so grievous that, that's where the fat calf was eaten by the skinny calf, and the skinny calf never got big. Well, the reason why, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, definitely go back and watch or go back and watch the series on Joseph, because Joseph interpreted the dream of the king, and when he went before the king, he interpreted that dream to tell him that it was going to be terrible, terrible times that were going to come after amazing times. So after 7 years of a feast, it was going to be some grievous famine. Well, here's the thing. When he told those people, store up, store up, store up, just like God has been telling people now, store up, store up, store up, because there's going to be a time when things are going to shut down. Store up, store up, store up. But guess what people are doing now? Eating good, going out, doing everything they want to do. And I'm not telling you that we shouldn't enjoy. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying we should be paranoid or fearful, but we should take time to set aside, set aside, set aside. When we don't do that, guess what happens? Now you have to be enslaved to the one who did. So guess what happened? When the times hit, they had to sell everything that they had in order to eat. They had to sell everything they had in order to have a drink. Why? Because they did not store up. This is how anybody ends up in slavery. Now, I'm not talking about the captivity that, when people stole us. Now, I ain't talking about that. That was wrong. Okay, that was wrong. I don't agree with that at all. But what I'm saying is, sometimes we cause ourselves to enter into slavery because we are not good stewards over what God has committed to our trust. And then we now have to be subject to somebody else. When God warned us, stop spending, store up, store up. We don't listen. And then we are what? Broke, busted, and disgusted. And we don't have what we need. We in our culture tend to beg for what we need, but we buy everything that we want. We buy everything we want, and then we have to beg for what we need. And so when God starts to warn you to stop spending, to store up, listen, so that you are not among those who have to sell everything that they have and do deplorable things because they didn't store up. They didn't store up, okay? But if the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter. If a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. If he fails in any of these categories, these three obligations, she may leave as a free woman without making any payments. Then it goes on to talk about personal injury. Anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. But if it was simply an accident permitted by God, I will appoint a place of refuge where the slayer can run for safety. However, if someone deliberately kills another person, then the slayer must be dragged even from my altar and be put to death. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Ooh-wee. I just saw a young girl fighting her grandmother on Facebook. I'm like, wow. Again, as we're going through these, stop and think about how we would be able to fare with this over us without Jesus, without a sacrifice. Verse 16, kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves. Anyone who dishonors father or mother must be put to death. Well, be a lot of animals right there. Now suppose two men quarrel, and one hits the other with a stone or fist, and the injured person does not die but is confined to bed. If he is later able to walk outside again, even with a crutch, the assailant will not be punished, but must compensate his victim for lost wages and provide for his full recovery. Another thing we should mention is that a lot of the laws that we have in this time are built just from this. It's amazing how we'll say we don't believe the Bible to be the book of God, or we don't believe it, but a lot of the things that we follow are from this right here. If a man beats, I'm at verse 20. If a man beats his male or female slave with a club, and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. But if the slave recovers within a day or two, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property. Now, suppose two men are fighting, and in the process, they accidentally strike a pregnant woman, so she gives birth prematurely. If no further injury results, the man who struck the woman must pay the amount of compensation the woman's husband demands and the judge approves. But if there is further injury, the punishment must match the injury: a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. If a man hits his male or female slave in the eye and the eye is blinded, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And if a man knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth. If an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox must be stoned and its flesh may not be eaten. In such a case, however, the owner will not be held liable. But suppose the ox had a reputation for goring and the owner had been informed but failed to keep it under control. If the ox then kills someone, it must be stoned and the owner must also be put to death. However, the dead person's relative may accept payment to compensate for the loss of the life. The owner of the ox may redeem his life by paying whatever is demanded. The same regulation applies if the ox gores a boy or a girl. But if the ox gores a slave, either male or female, the animal's owner must pay the slave's owner 30 silver coins, and the ox must be stoned. Suppose someone digs or uncovers a pit and fails to cover it, and then an ox or a donkey falls into it. The owner of the pit must pay full compensation to the owner of the animal, but then he gets to keep the dead animal. If someone's ox injures a neighbor's ox and the injured ox dies, then the two owners must sell the live ox and divide the price equally between them. They must also divide the dead animal. But if the ox had a reputation for goring, yet its owner failed to keep it under control, he must pay full compensation, a live ox for the dead one, but he may keep the dead ox. Just imagine if we had to follow all of that stuff, or sacrifice, or lose lives, or what have you. Wow. Moving on to the 22nd chapter. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong button. Property regulations. So this is the protection of property. If someone steals an ox or sheep and then kills it or sells it, the thief must pay back 5 oxen for each oxen stolen and 4 sheep for each sheep stolen. And I know for a fact that many businesses do this, because I remember being with someone one time. We were in the mall and this person stole some cologne, right? We were together. They stole some cologne. They got caught. When they got caught, the owner said that they had to pay, if it wasn't 3, it was 4 times as much, and the person did not have it. And the reason why I knew that was because I had to pay it for the person to not be carted off to jail. So it's amazing to me how we often, like I said, pattern ourselves after things and have no idea where they originated from. Verse 2, if a thief is caught in the act of breaking into a house and is struck and killed in the process, the person who killed the thief is not guilty of murder. But if it happens in daylight, the one who killed the thief is guilty of murder. A thief who is caught must pay in full for everything he stole. If he cannot pay, he must be sold as a slave to pay for his theft. If someone steals an ox or a donkey or a sheep and it is found in the thief's possession, then the thief must pay double the value for the stolen animal. If an animal is grazing in the field or the vineyard and the owner lets it stray into someone else's field to graze, then the animal's owner must pay compensation from the best of his own grain or grapes. If you are burning thorn bushes and the fire gets out of control and spreads into another person's field, destroying the sheaves of the uncut grain or the whole crop, the one who started the fire must pay for the lost crop. Suppose someone leaves money or goods with a neighbor for safekeeping and they are stolen from the neighbor's house. If the thief is caught, the compensation is double for the value of what was stolen. But if the thief is not caught, the neighbor must appear before God, who will determine if he stole the property. Suppose there is a dispute between 2 people who both claim to own a particular ox, donkey, sheep, article of clothes, or any lost property. Both parties must come before God, and the person who God declares guilty must pay double compensation to the other. Now, suppose someone leaves a donkey, donkey, ox, sheep, or any other animal with a neighbor for safekeeping, but it dies or is injured or gets away, and no one sees what happened. The neighbor must then take an oath in the presence of the Lord. If the Lord confirms that the neighbor did not steal the property, the owner must accept the verdict and no payment will be required. But if the animal was indeed stolen, the guilty person must pay compensation to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by the wild animal, the remains of the carcass must be shown as evidence, and no compensation will be required. If someone borrows an animal from a neighbor and it is injured or dies when the owner is absent, the person who borrowed it must pay full compensation. But if the owner was present, no compensation is required, and no compensation is required if the animal was rented, for this loss is covered by the rental fee. Talking about social responsibility here with regards to property. If a man seduces a virgin, social responsibility and regulations, period. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to anyone and has sex with her, he must pay the customary bride price and marry her. But if her father refuses to let him marry her, the man still has to pay him an equal amount to the bride price of virginity. You must not allow a sorceress to live. So that's saying suffer not a witch to live. Witches should not live. Uh-oh. Anyone who has sexual relations with an animal must certainly be put to death. Wow. That's on the rise today. As nasty as it is to think about, but that's on the rise today. Anyone who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. Well, you must not mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. Oh, well. You must not exploit a widow or an orphan. If you exploit them in any way and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will blaze against you and I will kill you with the sword. Then your wives will be widows and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who are in need, do not charge interest as a moneylender would. If you take your neighbor's cloak as security for a loan, you must return it before sunset. This coat may be the only blanket your neighbor has. How can a person sleep without it? If you do not return it and your neighbor cries out for help, then I will hear, for I am merciful. You must not dishonor God or curse any of your rulers. You must not hold anything back when you are giving me offerings from your crops and your wine. You must give me your firstborn sons. You must also give me the firstborn of your cattle, sheep, and goats. But leave the newborn animal with its mother for 7 days, then give it to me on the 8th day. You must be my holy people. Therefore, do not eat any animal that has been torn up and killed by wild animals, throw it to the dogs. And last but not least, we're at chapter 23, which are some additional regulations. You must not pass along false rumors. That right there, oh boy. You must not cooperate with evil people by lying on the witness stand. You must not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Well, there go all the animals right there. All of them. When you are called to testify in a dispute, do not be swayed by the crowd to twist justice. And do not slant your testimony in favor of a person just because that person is poor. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey that has strayed away, take it back to his owner. If you see that the donkey of someone who hates you has collapsed under its load, do not walk by. Instead, stop and help. In a lawsuit, you must not deny justice to the poor. Be sure never to charge anyone falsely with evil. Never sentence an innocent or blameless person to death, for I never declare a guilty person to be innocent. Take no bribes, for a bribe makes you ignore something you clearly see. A bribe makes even a righteous person twist the truth. You must not oppress foreigners. Here we go, repeating. You know what it's like to be a foreigner, for you yourself were once a foreigner in the land of Egypt. He just said the exact same thing. What did I say about the repetition of God? He's trying to give you clarity. Plant and harvest your crops for 6 years, but let the land be renewed and lie uncultivated during the 7th year. Then let the poor among you harvest whatever grows on its own. Leave the rest for wild animals to eat. The same applies to your vineyards and olive groves. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but on the 7th day you must stop working. This gives your ox and your donkey a chance to rest. It also allows your slaves and foreigners living among you to be refreshed. Pay close attention to all my instructions. You must not call on the name of any other gods. Do not even speak their names. He repeated some things there. Why? I want you to remember, because I'm going to hold you accountable. All right. So now it's talking about 3 annual festivals. You can find more about this in Exodus 34 and 18 through 26. 34 is 34th chapter, 18 through 26 verse, and then Deuteronomy 16 verses 1 through 17. It says, each year you must celebrate 3 festivals in my honor. First, celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days, the bread you eat must be made without yeast, just as I commanded you. Celebrate this festival annually at the appointed time in early spring in the month of Abib, for that is the anniversary of your departure from Egypt. No one may appear before me without an offering. Second, celebrate the festival of harvest, when you bring me the first crops of your harvest. Finally, celebrate the festival of the final harvest at the end of the harvest season, when you have harvested all of your crops from the field. At these 3 times each year, every man in Israel must appear before the sovereign, the Lord. You must not offer the blood of any sacrificial offering together with any baked goods containing yeast. And do not leave the fat from the festival offerings until the next morning. As you harvest your crops, bring the very best of the first crops or first harvest to the house of the Lord. You must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So now we're talking about the promise of the Lord's presence. Again, remember, we take not his presence for granted. We shouldn't be, right? So he's promising them his presence. He's saying, I'm going to be with you. And it's like, wow, he promises the same with us. I'll be with you. I'll be with you. I left a comforter, right? I left a comforter. I left a teacher. I left somebody who knows all things to lead and guide you. So we have this same promise in the form of the Holy Spirit. Okay? But we deny the power. We deny the authority of the Holy Spirit every day. See, verse number 20. See, I am sending an angel before you to protect you on your journey and lead you safely to the place I have prepared for you. Pay close attention to him and obey his instructions. Do not rebel against him, for he is my representative, and he will not forgive your rebellion. But if you are careful to obey him, following all my instructions, then I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, so you may live there, and I will destroy them completely. You must not worship the gods of these nations or serve them in any way or imitate their evil practices. Instead, you must utterly destroy them and smash their sacred pillars. You must serve only the Lord your God. If you do, I will bless your food, water, and I will protect you from illness. There will be no miscarriages or infertility in your land, and I will give you long, full lives. I will send my terror ahead of you and create panic among all the people whose land you invade. I will make your enemies turn and run. I will send terror ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land will become desolate and the wild animals will multiply and threaten you. I will drive them out a little at a time until your population has increased enough to take possession of the land. And I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the eastern wilderness to the Euphrates River. I will hand over to you the people now living in the land, and you will drive them out ahead of you. Make no treaties with them or their gods. They must not live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me. If you serve their gods, you will be caught in the trap of idolatry. That you will be caught in the land of, in the trap of idolatry. Okay? So that's where we are. Here are a couple of major points. God has a standard that does not change based on who we are and what we're going through. God clearly defines his standards to ensure that we know what to do. He left a teacher for us. Idolatry in no way is tolerated. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. And last but not least, obedience was and is the principal thing. It was and is the principal thing. Okay? All right. So we'll stop now for questions.